Before I start by introducing myself, I'm Keefe, taking over Impression Publisher. This is a bit about my computing history, really. I've got soldering iron, 576 Christmas, 577, built an 8085 processor board. First real computer was a Tandy TRS-80, Model 1. Then BBC, Dark Meetings, RISC PC, then got a Spark stations and things. Still using the RISC PCO continually. 2005, bought an Ionics. Then in 2010, I've contacted Paul Rivers about the possibility of a new version of Impression, and he said that he was working on it and would let me know. Then in September of 2011, my first Ionics failed. It was completely dead. I got out my old floppies and they didn't work. So I rang him again. And what he said was he was still working on it, but if in 6 months' time he hadn't done a thing, give him a call back and he'd see what we could do. And I also offered at that point to help him. I then managed to get a copy from my brother's older disc, so I reinstalled Impression. So that's fine. 2012 in May, 6 months later, he still hadn't managed to do anything, so I had a chat, and he said that he would send me the sources, and 3 days later, email arrived, the web address, and I downloaded a 380 megabyte file which contained the Impression sources as he'd received them from Computer Concepts with the changes that he'd made. Let's see. And contained in this 380 meg archive, there were 1100 megabytes of files when you compressed them. The Impression sources that I received were dated November '96, and there was somewhere between the 5.11 and 5.12 releases. Most of the other sources for the actual main parts were missing, and as concerned the modules, some of the sources were available and some of them were completely missing. And this was basically my information on how I discovered what was there and what was present. Now, the most important of these modules is a module called BigLinker, which is how Computer Concepts wrote their software. Because when they started writing the Archimedes in '86, there was no compilers or assemblers apart from the one built into BASIC. And so what they did was they designed their own little module that allowed you to write basic programs containing assembler, and then you could declare procedures and functions using module star commands, and then you could save your compiled basic assembler into a special file format that you could then link together, and it would link together all the different modules. When I unpacked all of this and the instructions from Paul, none of it built. All I got were error messages, and I had a few chats with Paul on the phone. I made a few discussions, and it appeared that between when he'd been working on it and when he'd given me the sources, RISC OS had been changed in such a way that it no longer worked. Now, coming to this show, in fact, last year, I had a chat with the guys at the RISC OS Open Show, and it finally tweaked what I needed to do to get the software to work, because what was actually happening was the way it worked, when you used an address, instead of putting any address in there, you declare in advance the name of the object you were going to use. And what that would do is create a virtual basic variable containing that name, and it would put in a very high negative number as that address. So basically, in the ARM instruction branch, or branch with a link, it would put in, the top bit would be set, and then it would individually allocate the next number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, counting down from the far end, because no real basic program would be 32 meg negative in size of the branch address. So that's how they implemented it. But in the RISC OS, I think it was 5.16 or 14, something around there, what they've done is they said, well, actually, you shouldn't be using addresses of that size. You should actually be using -32, +32. And so it stopped any of the code from assembling. So what I then rewrote the B-linker module sections that dealt with that, so that it actually used a smaller address range, and I limited then to plus and minus 16 megs of address space. And as long as your files were no bigger than 16 megs, it was fine, and then it all compiled. So I then was able to build the first version of Impression Publisher. And I'll just show you how that works. So here are the sources. So here are all the impression sources. I'm in the way. So basically, this is what B-linker module does. Control one. Oh, looks like I'm doing something. I need to do run 2. Here it is linking all the modules together, and that produces the main application. So a number of other parts of the impression software were available. Now there are also a number of various modules which Impression has as its heart. It uses a number of, they're basically procedure helpers for the impression software itself. And these parts are used in order to import files, graphics, the spell checker is done this way, and these are done, some of them are done directly by modules and some of them via Impression modules. And it has a little API that you register with the main impression software, and you then allocated memory either on the stack or heap or impacting dynamic areas depending upon what you ask for. And this allows the main application. Unfortunately, the software for this is, again, mostly missing. And so here are the modules themselves that make up the main part of the impression application, apart from the main app which you just saw being built. There was an old version of the hyphenation module, which I have updated and is now matching the current build from 5.1.12. And the same with the spell module, that was also out of date. I will be using the Martin with the ABI mod, AW renderer, GDraw, sprite extend. And then all the modules with spaces, there are no sources at all for. And the 2 modules with the dash, that other people have taken over the management of those modules, so luckily I can use the 32-bit modules for those. Unfortunately also, in order for computer concepts to manage their build processing, so for debugging, because there's no debugger, and what was there? For logging when you're doing the testing, for checking verification of have you gone through all the code, for producing release disks, etc. All of that code, apart from some early sets for sort of earlier versions of the software, is non-existent at all. All I've got are the actual modules so that you would use, but unfortunately they're not 32-bit compatible. And they also don't run under Emulon, so that doesn't really help. So unfortunately I'm going to have to rewrite from scratch quite a few of those modules, or reverse engineer how they actually work, and then try and apply the new changes to the software. So getting onto the file import list, there are a number of, well, these are text file formats and also the graphics loaders. The text file formats I do have the source code to, but I'm not really sure from a user point of view what of these file formats are relevant anymore. I don't imagine that anyone's using WordPerfect, WordStar, WordWise Plus, InterWord, Burst Word Plus, Acorn Desktop Publisher, maybe ASCII Basic, C, CSV is still being used. And also the rich text format is quite old, so I'm not sure about really what relevance most of that has. I have asked people in the past, but I haven't really got much feedback on that. And also there are the graphics loaders there are TIFF, Photo, CD, JPEG and Clear. Now obviously people were using JPEGs. I don't know, and you can use Clear because it's a more generic format that doesn't actually have any underlying requirements. But as far as Photo, CD and TIFF, I'm not really sure if they're used much by anyone anymore apart from for cameras. And the TIFF file format is so huge in its breadth and depth that its implementation would be a huge undertaking. Although unfortunately, Publisher is based on the TIFF file format internally. And there are a number of TIFF modules that I'll need to regenerate to make it fully 32-bit. Because without them, you can't do anything. So until that's complete, it will remain a 26-bit application. I am intending in the next, well, probably next 6 months anyway, to release some graphics loaders Mark II for the pre-release Impression X, which will work with the current Impression versions, but when you have the new Impression, it will understand that there are embedded GIF files, for example, PNG files inside there, and it will not use the backwards compatibility mode, and it will render them correctly. The way that will work is it will embed the raw data into a draw file as a new object type, and it will then add a sprite afterwards. And the older versions of Impression and Style, etc., will take those tags because it doesn't understand them, it will ignore them, and therefore just render the sprite there so that old file formats will be capable. And where you import JPEGs, it will render in a artworks file. And so you'll have an artworks embedded JPEG file, and that's how that will work.
Richard, does that mean if you drag in a JPEG,
yeah,
and then you want to do OLE,
yeah,
it'll load it directly into artwork?
Yes, because it'll be an artwork file for JPEGs. The others will be a draw file, so it'll load into draw. But draw you won't see anything because there'll be hidden files, there'll be hidden objects. So you will see the sprite. So you could put other things on top of the sprite and then send it back. So these are the description there. Yeah, right, so those are the file savers that currently exist for exporting your documents. Now, obviously, rich text format is still version 2. Now, I assume that will be importable by current rich text file readers on other platforms as well. I haven't actually tested it, and I don't know what style and other information is lost by doing so. So I may have to re-implement that. And the document definition format I'm trying not to change, or I'm going to change only in a backwards compatible way to not affect anything that's already working. Well, the main application itself is 13 megabytes of source files, of which there are about 2.5 million lines of code. And these describe the new graphics loaders, which will be a full re-implementation of just C and assembly. We'll be using the computer concepts, but I won't be changing the main apps. Areas. first got the code working on November the 7th, 2013. So that's the bit from there.
We're not there yet.
Not there yet.
Well,
November 2013.
sorry, 2012. Yes. I know. I met it. I got it wrong, didn't I? Yes, there was a doctor who wrote it on there. Yes, I wrote it.
Yeah.
What's the right lorry numbers?
It's because unfortunately the day after my brother was killed in a car crash, so that was a great day to remember. Right, so I don't know how many of you have used Publisher Plus, but the only real difference between Publisher Plus and Publisher is this extra icon here, which allows you to name colours so you can make object-specific things for when you're printing them out professionally or things like that. But otherwise, very similar. So now we can have a look at some impression source code.
Is there no prospect of getting any more source code from proof of concepts?
Well, when there's a little bit of a story there. When Paul negotiated to get the source code from proof of concepts, this was in 2003, and obviously they'd stopped working on it in 99, 2000. And when they went to the machine, which was the master machine of computer concepts for the software, they opened the machine and the hard disk was not present. So the code was all gone. So the code that is in existence is what was recovered from 2.5 days of Paul and computer concepts, checking every floppy disk, CD and hard disk in their archives from old machines. And that's why there's quite a lot of variation in the quality or the how old or new the software actually is. Either someone's got the hard disk or the hard disk was used by someone because their hard disk broke and they reformatted it. But which one it was, we'll probably never know.
Did none of the programmers keep sort of their own sort of black copies?
Well, not that I know of. Because quite a few of the programs are still there.
Yeah.
Not all of them, but this is what a bit of impression code looks like. So you've got a whole lot of variable declarations. And then what this line clear link does is this is telling to blinker that we want well, these are both hex numbers, but we want to reserve this much space for references and this much space for objects to indirectly reference. So one is for how many I'm going to use, and the other one is how many I'm going to give back. So it's basically how many things do I need to talk to, and how many things am I going to call. So, and then these xrefs are declaring all the functions we're going to be calling externally, so that when they're referencing the code, so if you have a branch to overlap, de-overlap rather, the blinker assigns that the high negative number that it then puts in the assembler instruction. So when it comes along to link it later, it can search all the references and resolve the conflicts. So here's some code itself. So of course it's all ARM assembler.
But it is commented.
To various degrees. This is one of the best commented files. Because it's got a full definition of what the function should be. And it's got comments on every line. I think there are about 4 or 5 programmers looking at the software. Because they've got quite different commenting styles. Some of them just have a single line at the top, and all it does is say the name of the function, exactly like the and then it might have 1 or 2 comments in the code. And the process of converting it, what you actually have to do is you run, I've got some scripts off Martin, which you run the software through Perl scripts, and basically what it does is identify all the places which are not 32-bit compatible, or all the places that may or may not be 32-bit compatible. Some of them it can automatically convert into function calls which are being made 32-bit compatible. And the remainder, what it does is gives you an output file, and when you've got no output, it means you've correctly converted it. So basically, it's like compiling any old program, and as long as you've got errors, you have to keep going until you have it right. Unfortunately, most of the one in impression, which after speaking to Martin, wasn't the same in artworks. What you have to do is when you get a reference that isn't is a possible 32-bit violation, you have to then follow the reference, which will probably be just a branch to another piece of code based on a flag or not. And you then need to understand whether that flag is used in the code that it branches to, or anywhere down its tree. And what you then have to do is that, as you saw in that directory, there are about 100 files. So you have to use bind or grep and look through all the files to find that reference. And then when you go to that piece of code, you have to then run that through the converter, see if there's any references in that code to be 32 bits or not. Follow those references until you get to an endpoint where you know whether or not. And on average, it's taken me 3 or 4 hours for the bad ones. The good ones are about 5 minutes.
Is there any scope for writing a script that would turn the source code into HTML and options for every external reference, so that you wouldn't have to look, you just click? That's the way I'll do it.
It's possible.
You've got the listed evidence on.
You have to? Yes. Well, you have to list the ones that are external.
Yeah, I'm saying the ones that are external.
Yeah.
But in principle, you should recognize ones that are internal and just turn it into papers and links.
Yes. I was considering whether it might be better to use a relational database to actually just join them all together.
Yeah, well, whatever.
Yeah. Problem is that doing that, I'm not making progress, so it's quite a bit of a...
No,
you see what I mean? It's a...
You want someone else to do it.
Hey, we got volunteers.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
So there are quite a lots of code, and there's also, unfortunately, there also seems to be mixed in with the code, the style code, the impression junior code, the unfortunately, depending on the point of view, all the code for all the other versions of impression, the publisher, impression 2, and everything else, and also all the old code that's been removed, and all the things that have been tried, and all the bugs that have been fixed, then unfixed, because they had consequences. For example, 10-digit file names, which is a bugbear of impression, has been fixed in the code, and has then been unfixed because it caused problems somewhere else. Apparently, when you use remote file systems, the impression would load up multiple copies of the same document because it didn't realise that they were 10-digit limited file names on the external file system, and it would then merge them together partially internally, and it caused huge problems, so they took it all out. All the software to do so is still in there, and it's commented out. So obviously there was some issue, some bugs that still need to be fixed to get it right. But I haven't been able to that. Documentation-wise, there is some, I've got the actual publisher manuals as publisher documents, but the developer documentation, there's very little. There's a few short documents on how all the parts work together. But it's very tricky to understand what the intention was, as there seems to be no following of any standards. whereas it appears that in artworks they had learned from all their mistakes. Now have the idea of how to do it better. This is actually a great listing of everything that I received when I almost 3 meg. Here are all the files. So I've also got the source code to another number of other computer concepts and products, including compression, the drivers for the Eagle MPEG card, or MPEG card, Eagle video card. But unfortunately also there seem to be lots of different versions of the same thing mixed in. So you might find, for example, that if you've got version 1.7 of something, you might find a 1.8 or 1.6, but you might find actually the version that was released might be 1.6, but it doesn't match the 1.6 you've got. It doesn't match the 1.5 I've got, or the 1.7. It appears to be that there's bits being taken in and out. And there are obviously intermediate backups from the actual release, which makes the job far more complicated. For example, the 2 modules that I have sorted out of the sources, they took about a week and a half each to get the code that they'd got building into the same code that actually the module that they released was. That was before I could start the 32-bit conversion. So my intention is, instead of now converting it to 32-bit because of the extra effort involved, is I'm trying to fix all the bugs. Final complete compression edge, you understand. It's going to be fully 32-bit. Native JPEG support. Now, I'm intending to have native JPEG support in the first release. So I've already started the JPEG support addition to it. So, for example, it supports artworks JPEG files, and it also supports raw JPEG files. And it can also understand the fact that you've got one of those in lower, and it'll be able to just export the JPEG directly from one of those, because there's no point in re-inventing the wheel, just put them in directly. So the dictionary is obviously quite a bit out of date. There are quite a lot of words that are now in common use in English language that when they bought the dictionary in '86 didn't exist. So I think I'm intending to take the dictionary they've got and merge it with some open source dictionary so that chips it on.
Something that would be useful in the dictionary that I've never seen is a way of removing certain classes of words, like you want either the British or the Oxford or American spellings, or not a mixture.
All right.
So a way of removing words from the dictionary would be helpful.
It may be possible to produce a dictionary editor, I suppose. Maybe that function.
You know, or just to exclude certain lists from. An exclusion list.
Right, all right. So, yes, possible. Could add that to the list. Right, so and then also to improve the printing to fully fit 24-bit rather than the 8.5 bits at the moment. Apart from the stuff that you're getting from the PostScript 3 printer drive. And then, of course, to do proper G-Plex printing of this. I do a lot of leaflets for my own use. And, of course, they're double-sided. And so, at the moment, what I do is I print one side, wait for the paper to dry for a day, and then put it all back and do the other side. But obviously, as the printer prints both sides anyway, it would be much more useful than compression would do both sides automatically in line. But that's just a matter of producing the right PostScript or other commands to do so. Now these are the features I think I'd like to change. Sort of, like the euro symbol, I'd like to delete the other way around, just like you do. You can press the delete key like you do in Word. It clicks one way and it clicks the other way with delete. But these will be options to choose. Because I understand that some people are using the way certain things are. And they'll by default be, I don't know which way around, but you'll be able to change it. I'd like to remove the 10 character file name, but as I said, I identified issues because I found the source code that tried to fix that simply. Right. So other file formats. Apparently you don't have 77 graphics per chapter, but I don't know how we run out from that, so I'm not sure how high a priority it is.
Just have a new chapter.
Yes, but I don't know, is it actually an issue?
What is that? A little bit of the old file format?
Yes, it's to do with the old file format, because you can still export an impression document as a 77 file per directory object. Now I'd like to add some undo features, which should be a bit useful. So when you select and delete text, it isn't gone forever. But obviously there may be some other issues with that. So you don't want files growing forever. And also unused fonts in documents that you put fonts in, change your mind, send it to someone else. It's quite a useful feature, so I want to have a feature that finds all the fonts, sees which ones you're using, and then automatically gets rid of the ones that you're not using from the list, but they won't know when you load the document.
Can I just interrupt? I think that I've hit a bug where if you, I don't know, use the internet and your font directory is very large, it crashes what it has to in the past. I only use style, but it crashes, it has crashed that.
All right, come and get everything in email.
Yeah, it's years ago when this used that.
Yeah. Probably that the table's not big enough. Right, and apparently also we have 256 frames per page. I don't know how much of an issue that is either. But obviously it uses a byte to store which frame number is. You have to use it FF to say there's more information following. And also one thing that I find is I can't make a draw file small enough. But it will make it small enough when you import them. But if you try and change the size of the draw file afterwards, it's 5% is the smallest you can make it. Apparently the reason, according to code-wise, for 5% is that there was a bug in earlier versions of the draw renderer that if you had it bigger than that, it would mess up, it would crash.
Speaking of frames per page, I think I heard once they intended to include a marquee select of frames. Because sometimes if you've got them overlapping, it's hard to get them all.
Oh yes. Right. I hadn't heard about that. It's possible, add it to the list. Right, ready? Okay, right. Yeah, sure. And then this is the last bit, and then these are the bugs that I've identified so far, and then I've managed to fix 3 of them. And if you come to my stand, I've got some impression lists that you can find information about, and also information on pre-registering for the reference codes. Thank you.